I was halfway through unloading 2x4s from my truck when the squad car rolled up to my driveway. The sun was barely up, and I already had sweat on my brow and sawdust on my jeans. I had waited years to start building the addition to my home office, years of saving, planning, and dealing with permits. Everything was legal. Everything was ready, until the HOA decided to stick their nose where it didn't belong. The patrol car door creaked open and out stepped Officer Daniels, looking confused before his boots even hit the pavement. "Morning," he said, adjusting his belt. "Got a call about some unauthorized construction here." I knew exactly who made that call before he even finished the sentence. From behind a hedge like a crow circling a carcass, out came Jalene Granger, our HOA board secretary and full-time busybody. She stormed toward us in her sun hat, clipboard in hand like she was leading a federal investigation on bricks and nails. "That's him, officer," she barked. "He's building a structure without HOA approval. It violates Article 7, Section 4 of the Community Standards." I wiped my hands and turned to the officer. "She's been harassing me all week about this, but I've already cleared everything with the city. Building permits approved, inspections scheduled. Want to see the deed?" He looked between us, then nodded. Jalene scoffed. "Officer, you don't need to see his deed. He's clearly in violation of the HOAs. I'll be the judge of that." Daniels cut her off, walking with me to the back of my truck, where I kept a folder with all the paperwork. I handed over my property deed and the permits. Daniels flipped through the pages, eyebrows slowly rising. "You own this entire lot?" he asked. "Yup. Bought the extra half-acre last year from the guy next door. That strip Jalene thinks is common area. It's mine now." Jalene's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "That can't be right. The board never approved that sale." "That's because it didn't need your approval," I said. "It was a private sale between me and Mr. Reynolds. You were too busy yelling about someone's mailbox being the wrong shade of beige to even notice." Daniels handed me back the folder and gave Jalene a look that said he was done. "Everything checks out. He's got full rights to build on his property." "Not a thing I can do here." He tipped his hat to me. "Have a good day, Mr. Jensen," Jalene sputtered. But the HOA rules don't override city permits and property rights," Daniels said flatly before getting back in his cruiser. As he pulled away, Jalene stood frozen, her jaw twitching like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. I walked back to my lumber pile, picked up a board, and looked her dead in the eyes. "Better grab a chair, Jalene. This office is going up fast." She stormed off, heels clicking furiously on the pavement, gripping her clipboard like it owed her money. And that's when I knew this war with the HOA was just getting started. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories, 2 days after Officer Daniels left without incident. I was on the roof frame tightening bolts when a white SUV rolled up and parked half on the curb in front of my house. Out stepped a man in a pressed polo with the HOA logo embroidered over the chest and an expression like he'd just bitten into something foul. He didn't approach right away, just stood on the sidewalk with arms folded, scanning the frame like he was waiting to see it collapse on its own. I climbed down and walked over, wiping my hands on a rag. "You lost?" I asked. He pulled out a laminated name badge clipped to his chest. "Nathan Price, I'm the HOA's architectural compliance officer." "Didn't know we had one of those," I said. "Y'all must be getting real creative with the budget." He ignored that. "We received a new complaint about your build. The board has issued a cease and desist order pending a review." I blinked. "You're issuing orders now?" He handed me a neatly printed letter, with the HOA's letterhead at the top and a bunch of pseudo-legal jargon underneath. "Per Community Bylaw 72, all new construction must be approved by the board. You failed to submit architectural renderings for review." I glanced over the paper, then handed it back. "This isn't enforceable. The structure's already been approved by the city, and that lot you're so worked up about, entirely mine. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction." "You're mistaken." Price said, holding the paper like it was the Magna Carta. The board voted last month to amend the boundaries of common area. Your side lot is now designated for community gardening. I stared at him. You're joking. It passed with unanimous board approval, he added. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that the HOA voted to redraw property lines and claim land that's legally mine, without notifying me, after the sale was already recorded with the county. It was a special session. Emergency designation, he said, straight-faced. I took a step closer. That's called land theft. Price's lips twitched, but he didn't move. If you continue construction, we'll fine you $500 per day. We're also pursuing a lien. I let out a short laugh. You're going to place a lien on land you don't own, for a structure that's fully permitted after illegally trying to annex my property? He tucked the paper back into his folder. You'll be hearing from our attorney, I nodded. Good. Because you'll be hearing from mine first. He turned and walked back to his SUV, not looking back. He didn't even pretend to be friendly. Just got in, started the engine, and drove off like he had somewhere more important to be than explaining his attempted land grab. That evening, I pulled up county parcel maps and printed every page that showed my property boundaries. I highlighted the side lot and stapled them to the original deed and my purchase contract. Then I added the HOA's cease and desist letter to the stack and dropped the whole thing off at my lawyer's office before heading home. The next morning, my neighbor across the street, Denise, a retired nurse with a sharp tongue and a sharper sense of justice, walked over while I was unloading drywall. Heard they tried to claim your lot for a garden, she said, shaking her head. They're out of their minds. Apparently it's an emergency, I said. She snorted. The only emergency is them realizing they can't control you. She handed me a sealed envelope. This came to my house by mistake. From the HOA. I opened it. Inside was a fine $2,000 for unauthorized construction on common property, plus an additional notice threatening to suspend my community privileges. Whatever that meant. Denise watched me read it. They're trying to make an example of you. Then they picked the wrong house, I said. That afternoon, I filed a formal complaint with the county recorder's office for attempted fraudulent claim of property by a private entity. My lawyer, Ben, sent a cease and desist of our own to the HOA, demanding they retract their false boundary claim and cancel all fines within 5 business days or face legal action. By the following week, I noticed a subtle shift. Workers from the HOA's maintenance crew were coming by in unmarked vans instead of their usual branded trucks. One of them parked near the corner of my property for nearly an hour without stepping out. Another tried to take photos from behind a fence until I walked out holding a camera of my own. He left before I even raised it. Then came the certified letter. This time it wasn't from the HOA, it was from the county prosecutor's office. Dear Mr. Jensen, it began. We are in receipt of your documentation regarding the unauthorized attempt by your local homeowners association to designate your property as common area without legal justification. This office has opened a preliminary investigation into potential violations of property law and misuse of organizational authority. I sat back in my chair, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally begin to lift. 2 days later, an investigator visited my property. Not a uniformed officer this time, but someone from the county's real estate fraud division. Her name was Alina Mendez, and she came prepared notebooks, camera, printed maps, and a copy of the HOA's cease and desist letter, which she laid on my table like it was radioactive. I've seen a few shady boards, she said, flipping through her pages, but redrawing property lines by internal vote, that's a new one. They figured if they made it sound official, most people wouldn't fight it, I said. I just happen to have receipts, she nodded. They've filed 3 complaints about you with our office in the past month, all anonymously. Let me guess, Jolene Granger, she didn't answer, just smiled and jotted something in her notes. We'll need to interview the board members. If they knowingly submitted false documentation to the county or attempted to enforce a fraudulent claim, that's a criminal matter. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning in the clubhouse. I hadn't planned on attending in years, but now I marked it on the calendar with a red pen. Saturday came, and I walked into the clubhouse with a folder under my arm and Denise at my side. Word had spread about the investigation, and the crowd was larger than usual. People from every corner of the neighborhood were packed in, whispering to each other, all eyes shifting toward the front where Jolene, Price, and 2 other board members sat stiffly at the head table. Jolene tried to start with the agenda, but I raised my hand. This board attempted to reclassify private property as common land without notifying the owner or the county, I said, loud enough for the back rows to hear. Then they issued fines, sent threats, and tried to place a lien based on that false claim. Murmurs rippled through the room. Price leaned forward. That's not the full story. Ben stood up in the back row. Actually, it is. He walked to the front, pulled out a copy of the deed, and laid it on the table in front of Jolene. This is the county registered deed confirming Mr. Jensen's ownership of the lot in question. This, he said, slapping down the HOA's cease and desist, is a fabricated document attempting to override that deed. And this, he added, producing a letter from the prosecutor's office, is notice of an active investigation into the board's conduct. Gasps echoed around the room. Jolene's voice broke as she tried to speak. This is all a misunderstanding. You forged a boundary map, Alina Mendez said, stepping forward from the back. You submitted it to the county with no legal basis. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. 2 board members stood up and backed away from the table. Jolene sat frozen. Price looked like he was chewing gravel. Alina turned to the crowd. If any resident has received enforcement letters or fines based on this fabricated boundary, we recommend you contact our office immediately. I looked around and saw heads nodding, people pulling out phones, some already snapping photos of the documents on the table. The meeting adjourned without another word from the board. They didn't even try to finish the agenda. Outside, neighbors came up to shake my hand. A few gave me pats on the back. Denise just grinned and said, "Told you they messed with the wrong guy. It wasn't over. Not yet." But the tide had turned, and for the first time in years, people weren't scared of the HOA anymore. They were watching it closely. 3 days after the meeting fell apart in front of half the neighborhood, I got a call from the county investigator's office. Alina didn't bother with pleasantries. "We pulled the HOA's submitted maps," she said. They backed their fake claim with a forged signature from a city planning official who retired 2 years ago. I leaned against my kitchen counter, the morning coffee suddenly forgotten. "You're sure it wasn't a mistake?" They used a planning form that hasn't existed since before the official retired. The formatting alone gives it away. Whoever did this wasn't just bending the truth, they committed a felony. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. So what now? There's going to be a criminal referral. You'll be contacted by the district attorney's office for a formal statement. That night, I installed 2 more motion cameras, one facing the back fence line, the other angled toward the street. I wasn't taking chances. I didn't know how desperate the board would get when they realized jail time might be on the table. The next morning, a white sedan with government plates pulled up. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out and knocked on my door. I opened it with the folder of documents already in hand. "Mr. Jensen, I'm Assistant DA Mark Holloway. Mind if I come in?" I led him to the dining table where everything was laid out. He didn't need long to get up to speed. We've already issued subpoenas for the board's communications. Emails, internal memos, anything related to the lot reclassification. If they coordinated this knowingly, they're looking at conspiracy, forgery, and attempted fraud. They tried to bury me in fines, I said. Then they tried to steal my land. What happens to people like that? He looked straight at me. If the evidence holds, they'll be standing in front of a judge within a month. Later that afternoon, I was cutting drywall when a familiar voice called from the sidewalk. I turned to see Harold Kim, the HOA treasurer, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't step onto my property, just stood on the curb with his hands buried in his pockets. "I didn't sign off on any of this," he said. "They used my name on the vote, but I was out of town that weekend. I've got the flight records to prove it." I stepped down from the platform and met him halfway. "Why tell me?" "Because they're about to throw me under the bus," he said. "I got a call from Jolene last night. She said if I didn't back their story, they'd say I orchestrated the whole thing." "Did you?" "Hell no. I told them from the start the side lot wasn't ours. They said it didn't matter, that no one would push back." I nodded once. "Then you better talk to the DA." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "You're not the only one they've targeted. There's a guy 2 streets over Rick Vasquez. They tried to fine him for repainting his shutters without approval. That doesn't sound illegal." He used the exact shade listed in the HOA's own color guide. "They claimed it was visually inconsistent with the home's aesthetic and tried to charge him $800. I raised an eyebrow. "That's not a fine, that's extortion. He's got photos, receipts, everything." "I'll tell him to reach out." By the end of the week, the DA's office had opened a formal inquiry into the board's activities dating back 3 years. A quiet buzz spread through the neighborhood. People who had kept their heads down were suddenly stepping forward. They brought old letters, emails, even audio recordings of board members making threats during enforcement visits. I attended the next emergency meeting only because the DA's office had asked me to. It wasn't held in the clubhouse this time. That had been padlocked by the city for audit compliance issues. We gathered in the high school gymnasium instead, and the room was packed. Jolene sat at a folding table, pale and stiff, with Price to her left, and the HOA's so-called legal advisor, a man named Victor Rusk, to her right. Rusk didn't look like much. Gray blazer, thin tie, but his eyes kept scanning the room like he was sizing up threats. The DA's representative, a woman named Lisa Tran, stepped up to the microphone first. She was calm, professional, and didn't waste time. "We are conducting a comprehensive criminal investigation into the activities of this board. If you have been fined, threatened, or received official-looking notices that don't match city records, please remain afterward to provide statements." Price stood suddenly. "This is a witch hunt. No one here has been harmed." A man in the 3rd row stood. "You fined my daughter for putting up Halloween decorations. That's not a crime," Price snapped. "She was 8 years old." Loud murmurs erupted. Jolene tried to regain control by reading from a sheet of paper, but Lisa spoke over her. "We've already confirmed that multiple documents submitted by this board were falsified, including forged signatures from city officials. That is a criminal offense under California state law." Victor Rusk leaned into the mic. "We'll be filing for a temporary injunction to maintain board operations." Lisa didn't even blink. "You won't be filing anything. The county has already suspended the board's authority pending the outcome of the investigation." Gasps. One woman in the back clapped once, then quickly stopped. Jolene's voice cracked as she tried to salvage the moment. "This is politically motivated." Lisa cut her off. "The county doesn't care about your politics. We care about the law." After the meeting, I stood outside the gym with Denise and Rick Vasquez, who'd brought his shutter photos in a manila envelope thick enough to double as a weapon. "They fined me for the color they told me to use," he said again, shaking his head. I thought I was losing my mind. "You're not," I said. "They just didn't think you'd fight back." Denise pulled out her phone and showed us a message she'd received from a neighbor who used to be on the board years ago. It was a screenshot of an old group chat with Jolene and Price discussing ways to discourage dissenters by targeting their homes with code violations. "They called it creative enforcement," she said. I passed the screenshot to Lisa Tran. Her eyes narrowed as she read. "This is what we needed. Keep it coming." By the following Monday, Jolene's house had a for sale sign in the yard. She didn't attend any more meetings, didn't answer her door, and skipped every scheduled deposition. Her lawyer tried to shift blame to Price, who in turn claimed Victor Rusk had misled them all. But the county didn't care who started it. They were all named in the civil suit filed by the DA's office. Charges included falsifying public documents, attempted unlawful seizure of property, issuing fraudulent fines, and conspiracy to defraud residents. At the next neighborhood gathering, an informal one on someone's front lawn, people brought lawn chairs and coolers. There was laughter, music, and something I hadn't seen around here in years: ease. No one looked over their shoulder. No one whispered about fines or letters or threats. Someone asked me what I planned to do now that construction was complete. Finish furnishing the office, maybe build a covered patio next, I said. Won't the HOA throw a fit about that too? There was quiet for a beat. Then Denise said, "What HOA?" Everyone laughed. A month later, new elections were held under county oversight. The old board was permanently barred from holding positions in any homeowners association within the state. The new board was comprised of people with backgrounds in construction, law, and community planning, including Harold Kim, who had turned over every email he could find. As for me, I started hosting weekend workshops in my new office, free sessions on property rights, city codes, and how to read your HOA's bylaws. The turnout was bigger than expected, because the truth is, they counted on people not knowing the rules. They banked on fear, silence, and isolation. But once you shine a light on that kind of power grab, it doesn't just stop, it crumbles. The county's civil suit against the former HOA board had barely begun to move through the courts when something far more serious landed in my mailbox. A thick envelope from the county DA's office, marked "Confidential," sat on my kitchen counter like a brick. Inside were copies of subpoenaed emails, dozens of them. Attached was a note from Assistant DA Holloway himself, requesting a follow-up meeting to discuss what they'd found. When I arrived at the downtown government building later that week, Holloway met me in a room with frosted glass walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. He didn't waste time. "This goes deeper than we thought," he said, setting down a stack of printed emails. "This isn't just about your property or some overreaching board. We believe members of the HOA were running a coordinated extortion scheme." He handed me one of the emails, dated nearly a year earlier. It was from Jolene to Price and 2 other board members, referencing a list of homeowners who had resisted compliance. She wrote that these residents should be pressured with maximum fines and, if possible, threatened with legal escalation to encourage early payments. In another message, Victor Rusk had instructed the board on how to leverage technical violations to justify larger penalties. He even provided a sample letterhead designed to look like it came from a municipal authority, complete with a fake city seal. I blinked at the page in my hand. They were sending these to people. "We've confirmed at least 19 instances," Holloway said. "But here's where it crosses into criminal territory beyond fines." He slid over a photo taken from a traffic cam. In it, Jolene was seen handing a thick envelope to a man outside a bank downtown. The man had since been identified as a former HOA contractor, someone who was supposed to be hired for landscaping and minor repairs. The county tracked his bank account. Over 6 months, he deposited over $30,000 from a shell account created by Price. They were laundering the money through fake maintenance contracts, Holloway said. "We think Price handled the funds while Jolene decided who got fined. Rusk gave them legal cover." I stared at the image, my stomach tightening. "So where's the contractor now?" "Gone. Disappeared 2 weeks before we uncovered the transfers. Last seen heading toward the state line. We've issued a warrant." The next morning, 2 unmarked cars pulled up outside Jolene's house. A pair of plainclothes detectives stepped out, one carrying a canvas evidence bag, the other a warrant. The front door didn't open. After knocking twice, they circled to the back. 5 minutes later, I heard the sharp crack of a locked door being forced open. From the sidewalk, I watched them lead Jolene out in handcuffs. She didn't protest. She didn't cry. She just looked hollow. As if the weight of her own scheme had finally landed on her all at once. Later that day, Price was arrested at his office. News vans showed up before sundown. Our quiet little neighborhood suddenly had a camera crew parked near the entrance sign, broadcasting the downfall of a power-hungry HOA to the whole county. Victor Rusk didn't go quietly. His lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming he was just providing legal advice and had no knowledge of how it was used. But the DA's office had a signed memo from him, detailing how to maximize HOA leverage through perception of municipal authority. That memo made it to the 6 o'clock news. With the criminal case now public, neighbors who'd once kept their heads down were finally speaking up. A woman named Karina, who lived 3 streets over, told a local reporter how she'd been threatened with foreclosure after refusing to pay a $5,000 fine for trimming a tree without approval. She'd nearly sold her house to escape the pressure. Another neighbor, retired military, stepped forward with voice recordings of Price demanding a compliance donation in exchange for rescinding a violation. That tape was played on the evening broadcast, Price's voice unmistakable. The fallout was swift. The county filed a separate racketeering case against the HOA as an entity, freezing its accounts and placing all assets under court control. The clubhouse, once the seat of their petty power, was shuttered. The HOA's property management partner terminated their contract and issued a statement condemning the former board's actions. Within a week, the DA offered plea deals to 3 board members who had voted in favor of the land grab, but hadn't participated in the financial scheme. In exchange for full cooperation and testimony, they'd avoid charges. I saw one of them, Linda, a soft-spoken woman who used to walk her dog past my house every morning at the grocery store. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. "I didn't know about the money," she said quietly, eyes darting to make sure no cameras were nearby. "I just thought we were making things more organized." I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in comforting anyone who nodded along while my land was being stolen. By the end of the month, the county confirmed formal indictments against Jolene, Price, and Rusk. Charges included conspiracy, wire fraud, forgery, extortion, and financial abuse of seniors since several victims were over 60. The trial date was set for late spring. Meanwhile, the new community board, a temporary group appointed by the county, began working on a new charter. They invited residents to submit ideas, and for the first time, people actually showed up to participate. I was asked to join the oversight committee. I accepted on one condition. Every future enforcement action would require documented approval from 3 separate people, none of whom could profit in any way. The clause passed unanimously. The HOA's name was officially changed. The new charter stripped fines of any financial leverage, turning them into community service suggestions instead. Instead of threatening people, the board was now organizing neighborhood cleanups, mural projects, and monthly town halls with open queue and accessions. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. And as for my office, it was finished, fully furnished. I mounted the original permit and deed on the wall in a shadow box, right next to a framed copy of the county's official boundary map highlighted in red where they'd tried to steal it. A few weeks later, I saw Officer Daniels, the same one who came that first morning at the hardware store. He was picking up paint for his garage. "You made the news," he said, nodding toward me as he tossed a gallon into his cart. "Yeah," I said, chuckling. "Wasn't planning on it," he raised an eyebrow. "Not many people stand up to an HOA and win, let alone get their leaders indicted. I just didn't like being lied to on my own land." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You ever think about running for city council?" I waved him off. "I've had enough politics for one lifetime." As I walked back to my truck, I spotted Denise across the parking lot. She was talking with Rick Vasquez and a few other residents, laughing about something. No clipboards, no threats, just neighbors finally acting like neighbors. The HOA hadn't just been dismantled, it had been defanged, exposed, and replaced with something better. The cameras were gone. The fines were gone. The fear was gone, and my office, the one they tried every trick in the book to stop, was still standing, stronger than ever.